Welcome back to Reddit R Us. What was the best "you have no power here" moment you've ever seen? Story 1. In my first apartment, my parents came to visit, and I said fudge when I hit my head on the open door of the freezer while standing up from grabbing something from the fridge. My mother said, "You can't talk like that in my house," and stopped mid-sentence. Story 2. A coworker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas, and he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this B sales vice president that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He just points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally, he tells her she has to go back to her seat or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete donkey of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin. Scary to think that she is a lot of people's boss. The entitlement is real. She's a delusional person who thinks the world revolves around her. Newsflash, it doesn't. Story 3. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order to their account, which is a red flag. I checked their phone number and find multiple accounts, each with 1 to 2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threatened to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually, the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day, she calls back and tries again, and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. The customer's thought process was really scam, 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 and if it doesn't work, then scam again. I'm glad the supervisor put her in her place by banning her. Those refunds might have been hurting the workers that were delivering food to her, so it serves her right not to have the service anymore. Story 4. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12+ hour days, 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking crap. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is effed up and the department manager, Bob, aka me, was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know crap about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him, and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site, out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only CEO could fire him. I said, "And Bob, right?" He sheepishly nodded, so I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an a-hole. Major red flag when a person you just met starts to talk crap about anything and everything. Unfortunately, the CEO did not do a good job of vetting the assistant manager. I'm surprised OP kept this cool for so long dealing with this guy, but it makes sense. He had to build up enough dirt on the assistant manager to get him rightfully terminated. Story 5. We had an HR lady who was extremely power hungry. She is walking around with the president of the company who flew in from Japan. She rushes him through the warehouse, just spits out, "Oh, these are the warehouse guys, we don't have to stop and talk to them." He stops, walks over, and starts talking to me about my last vacation, how buying my house went. You could just see her fuming behind him as we talked for almost 45 minutes. I've had multiple meetings with him. We knew each other really well. I don't think he liked her and dragged it out on purpose, but I was thrilled to see her just standing there bored as heck. The HR lady not caring about human relations? Something's wrong there. Story 6. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet, and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working, again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy was part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time, my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there, and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now, and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. Guess revenge is a dish best served on the side of the house. Story 7. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching his consultants, which in and of itself is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to our office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him, and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the heck he was doing here. He started in on me again, and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point, he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. I did the old hand on his back, point to the door, universal symbol for leave, or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. Story 8. Had an old boss who was a complete and total jerk. He was actually my boss's boss and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss, but he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him, and he just starts unloading, cursing, name-calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the F I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and I'll gladly take that money. If I'm busy being yelled at, I'm not busy with anything else. Seemed to work. Story 9. I taught my 6th grade students about democratic processes, and we ran a simulation. Without fail, every one of my classes tried to impeach me. Well, I feel a lot less original now. I'm a college student, and last year we had a class about Congress in which part of the class was simulation based. I got the idea to impeach our professor, and it soon became a bipartisan effort. Professor was pretty cool about it. When we submitted the articles, one of which included accusing him of murdering Jeffrey Epstein, he jokingly banged his fist on the table and called us all traitors. After the impeachment vote passed, the speaker told him, "The Senate will decide your fate," and he was in the loop enough to know that the acceptable response was, "I am the Senate." Story 10. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. Story 11. I worked at a Walmart as a cashier, and the assistant manager there was a D. He would insult everybody working there and forced us sometimes to do work above our pay grade. 6 months later, me and him got transferred to another Walmart that was just built, and they needed to pick a manager and assistant manager. Some random person got manager, but I got assistant manager. I guess all the complaints on the assistant manager basically gave him a demotion. So one day, he was ordering the other cashiers around. Then I pulled him to the side and told him that if he kept pulling the same around here, he would be out of here. I haven't heard anything from him since. Story 12. New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He didn't have a pass card yet, and a lower level employee told him that he can't enter without a pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in, but the worker insisted, "Show me the pass card or you're not entering." Few days later, this worker got a bonus. Sometime in the late 80s, I worked at a Walmart warehouse. There was a strict rule. If you didn't have your security badge, you could not get in the front door. One day, just behind me, an older fellow gets stopped by LP for no badge. One of my friends pokes me and points out the LP guy just refused to let Sam Walton in the door. We all stopped to watch what we assumed was going to be a show. To his credit, Mr. Walton stops and goes back to his vehicle and gets his badge, and he thanked the LP guy for following the rules. Story 13. When I was in high school, I worked at a popular warehouse club selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I'd make a good salesman, so my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers, nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that and started insisting that I needed to go fold clothes for a while, as in half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power tripping shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager close behind. Store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not. At this point, it would be more cost effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution?" Guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. The best jobs are when management has your back. Knowing this and the value of what you bring to the table is the best thing that manager could have ever done. I hope you kept this as a reference for future jobs. Story 14. One of my jobs is in a hotel/restaurant/bar. A guest came into the bar after having been refused service at our sister hotel down the road. He was very drunk and had been rude, abusive, and threatening to the staff. He insisted we serve him as he was a guest, but we'd already been phoned by our sister hotel so they could let us know what the situation was. We refused, but offered him some water and suggested he go up to his room. He then went on about how he had nearly bought our hotel and that he was practically our boss, so we should serve him or he'd have us fired. We refused. He told us he was a very rich man and would tip us hundreds of pounds if we served him. We refused. He was getting abusive at this point, so we again suggested he have some water and head up to his room. He went on to tell us that his brother was the mayor, so we should serve him. We refused and told him he should go on up to his room yet again. He then said he was going to the pub across the street, but all the pubs and restaurants in our town have a barred from one, barred from them all policy. We telephoned the other pubs to inform them of the situation. Many of them got back to us and said they had been offered money, been threatened with losing their jobs, and also told the story of the mayor. All of the pubs stuck to their guns and refused to serve him. Eventually, he came back to the hotel and went to his room. Story 15. I used to work for a super jerky manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is crappier than ever, and how much the store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, "If you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you." When the douchebag didn't move, new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. Story 16. Well, this might be a long one. I grew up around a mother with dissociative disorder as well as narcissism. She was addicted to opiates as far back as I can remember and would do anything to get them. And I mean anything. Growing up, it wasn't rare for her to have a tantrum during one of her highs and beat the crap out of me, break me down by picking apart every little thing she knew I was afraid of or self-conscious of, and actively sabotaging my relationship with my father and siblings. She would be up for days at a time, pass out standing up with her eyes glazed over and back hunched. And when she festered once again, start moving and otherwise destroying everything in the house. There were times where I'd leave and the house would be clean, and come home and it would look as though a pissed off tornado had run through the house. Broken glass, animal feces, dirty clothes, roaches, empty pill bottles, ground up pill residue, and other miscellaneous things littering the house. On particularly bad nights, she would hallucinate, and during those times, it wouldn't be uncommon to find pools of her blood on the ground from running through glass. I remember being up for days at a time because her and my father would scream at each other for days without stopping, actively trying to get me to pick one side or the other, even if it meant barging into my room at 4 a.m. to begin their screaming match. She manipulated me, abandoned me at times in the middle of nowhere when she'd meet up with her various sugar daddies. She was still with my dad during this, and never once apologized during her brief moments of mental clarity. If anything, she would blame everything but herself. In her mind, she was infallible. Money was always a big issue since she couldn't work in such a state. She sold some of her pills, yes, but ultimately, those funds were used to buy more drugs anyway. Because of this, we were homeless frequently, without power and water for literally years at a time, and barely ever had any food. It was almost every night I went to sleep with the only thing I'd eaten being the school lunch that day. On weekends, sometimes I didn't eat at all. The rest of my family had no clue this was happening. During the summer when I was 16, my aunt, whom I hadn't talked much with since I was a lot younger, got in touch. She asked if I'd like to come stay with them in Texas for a few weeks during the summer. Of course I said yes, and I was absolutely ecstatic. I didn't bother asking my parents since I'd be very much surprised if they even noticed I was gone, so they were unaware. My aunt drove up all the way to Iowa and stayed the afternoon with us. My parents seemed to lack the cognition to recognize she was even there out of the blue, so they didn't come out of their room. As I stated before would happen frequently, when she arrived, our house was fairly clean. We left for a bit to go get food, and when we returned, the tornado had already passed. As she told me when we were on our way to Texas, the thing that bothered her the most wasn't that our house had suddenly gone to hell. It was that I didn't even react to it. Instead, I tiptoed around the debris and started packing my things without a word. This deeply unsettled her, and ultimately, she asked me if I was safe where I lived. I said yes, as it was all I had ever known. She told me that what she saw frightened her, and she wanted me to come live with her in Texas. Thinking that she was joking, I brushed it off. After a few days down there though, I knew I had to do it. They showed me love, compassion, and care that I had never even known existed prior to this, and it shook me to my core. So we decided. I was going to get emancipated from my parents and move in with them. Ultimately, this involved sitting in a courthouse across from my parents and their lawyers. The judge asked why I wanted to leave, and I explained the above. I expressed the love and compassion I'd experienced for the first time in my life, and that I wanted to, for once, live in peace. Their lawyer rebutted, "To me, it seems as though you have no respect for your parents. Is it because of their financial situation? It looks as though you're attached to the perks of living in a family that makes a reasonable amount of money, and not that you want to leave because they're unfit parents." My mother and father joined in, hooting and hollering, actively trying to break me down as they have so many times before. I let him speak, I let them speak, and I held my tongue until it was my turn. They tried to goad me on, try to break me as they had so many times before, but I wouldn't let them. Finally, the judge asked me to speak. With as level a stare as I could muster, I looked at mother, my father, and their lawyer across from me and said, "If you're asking me if I have no respect for my parents, then you are correct. However, to say that it's simply financially motivated is incorrect. I no longer have respect for them because they have." As I was nearly finished, my mom, as she had so many times in the past, began to squirm and scream at me from across the table. "He's lying, the little bastard," until the judge slammed his gavel down and cut the room. My mother staring up at him in complete and utter disbelief. I looked at her, keeping the tears I knew were right behind the corner at bay, and said, "For once in your life, for once in my life, behave as an adult. You can't stop me by simply yelling over me anymore. You have nothing to hold over me now. You can do nothing." As I spoke, the judge motioned to his officer, who moved towards my mother. Her expression still frozen in complete bewilderment as the officer aggressively told her to get up out of her chair and escorted her out of the room. The judge looked to me, my aunt, my father, and his lawyer with one sweeping glance and then spoke. "I am sorry that you have had to deal with this for so long, young man. There's nothing more that you or anyone else needs to say. You deserve to live a normal life as a normal kid, and it's obvious to me that your parents are unfit to produce that kind of environment. You will go back to Texas with your aunt, and we will regularly have our social workers in touch to check in on how you are doing. Make the most of this second chance. Good luck, young man." Adjourned. Though the bang of his gavel was the only noise that permeated the room, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. My father and his lawyer were escorted out of the room, and the tears I had held back all this time came gushing out like a tidal wave. It's been 7 years since that day, and I am happy to say that I've managed to grow up and become a well-adjusted adult. I have a great career, great friends, and an amazing girlfriend. I've been in therapy ever since we got back to Texas, and I no longer have trouble sleeping or terrible bouts of anxiety and depression that I used to. Life is good. Shout out to OP's aunt for taking him in when he needed it the most. It's not easy to add another person to your family, but she wanted OP to have a better life, so it was definitely worth it. And shout out to OP too for not wasting his second chance. He really made something of himself and took advantage of the opportunity presented to him. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more crazy Reddit stories.